So that was fun. I love game theory. Like I said, I teach a whole course on it. But those are kind of all the concepts that we're going to introduce here. And now we want to get back to talking about oligopoly, because that is why we wanted to use game theory, is to analyze oligopoly behavior because of the interactions that go on. So the issue with an oligopoly, or let's say a duopoly with two firms, is that they can behave as a cartel. And that is where they collude. Instead of competing and making their own decisions, they work together and get together and plan to maximize profit in a way that is really anti-consumer. So they sort of work together as a monopoly. And typically they set prices instead of competing with each other on price to undercut and the other competitors, the other companies' prices. They will fix their price and try to maintain a high price. We have seen this. There have been a lot of famous and kind of interesting cases. One was between the auction houses, Sotheby's and Christie's. They agreed not to undercut each other's prices. The prices were in the percentage of the hammer price. Like, so if you're trying to sell a painting at Sotheby's, your fee for the auction house would be a percentage of the final price that the painting took at auction. So they agreed not to compete on that, and ultimately it was revealed. There was another case, famous case, called the Phases of the Moon case, where there was a bunch of, I think it was electricity firms, something like this, but they would bid, and they would take turns bidding, and the firm who had the right to bid and submit the high bid was determined by the phases of the moon. So they didn't need to get together every time. They would just look at the lunar calendar, and they could decide who was going to be able to bid and win the contract, and the others would refrain from bidding. There was another case that was made into a movie with Matt Damon about additives, like kind of chemical additives, and how the firms agreed not to compete on that. Now the thing is, when they enter a cartel, it does create a kind of a prisoner's dilemma. So let's look at that. And we're going to keep it as a two-player game, although some cartels have more than two firms. But we'll look at a market where there's only two firms, and they can choose whether to have a high price or a low price. Okay, so the high price usually goes with a lower quantity, which is what we saw in the monopoly. They restrict their output, and then they get a higher price, moving up along the demand curve. So with the high price, maybe they each make $50 million. Okay, so the payoffs in millions. With the low price, they just don't take as much in, that lower price. And here's the thing, if one of them has a low price and the other has a high price, the low price firm is going to get all the business, and the high price firm is going to be kind of shut out. These are just sample numbers. It could look a little bit different, but in this little example that I've seen, we have these numbers. So what happens if we analyze this game? Well, if the other firm price is low, you should price low because 40 is better than 0. The other firm price is high, you should price low because 99 is better than 50, and the same for the other firm. They should price low in the top row, and they should price low in the bottom row. So this does meet a prisoner's dilemma with both have a dominant strategy, which is low, and the low-low combination, which is the one and only Nash equilibrium, has lower payoffs for both. So this is a prisoner's dilemma, and there is a tendency for the cartels to fall apart. And you can see that pressure here. It's really hard to, for them to stick here and get this higher payoff. They have to play their dominated strategy. They have to play the strategy that's not dominant. And there's always a huge temptation to play your dominant strategy. It's the one that makes sense for you. It's giving you a better outcome no matter what. Now these are all one-shot games. It's another thing that we didn't really highlight, but this game is only played once. And in a repeated game, which oligopolies are together in the market over a long period of time, sometimes decades, it's a repeated game because they're playing against each other every day or every quarter. And that does introduce some different dynamics. But in this simple game, you can see that there is a tendency for the cartel to fall apart. The most famous cartel that we hear about most often is OPEC. I think it's oil producing and exporting countries. So that is illegal because they're countries. They're not governed by U.S. trade law. And so they do meet and they decide how much oil each of the countries is going to produce. And they know what the elasticity is, so they know what kind of price that's going to result in and what kinds of profits to their governments. And what's interesting about OPEC is that they're not all equal. Saudi Arabia is the really big player, and a lot of the other countries are kind of small. And so they don't always have the exact same goals. Saudi Arabia doesn't want oil to become too expensive because that is going to cause the oil-consuming countries to try to find alternatives. But the small countries, they don't have as much at stake. And so they want to profit from higher prices. And so they do have issues with defections of those small countries who produce more than what they were supposed to. They exceed their quota. And, Saudi Arabia has asked everybody or agreed with everybody, let's hold back and only produce this much, and that's going to give us a nice high price. And the smaller countries try to cheat and just produce a little bit more while everybody else is propping up the price with their restraint. So this is one way in which we can apply the prisoner's dilemma model to an oligopoly situation. And I'll talk about some more examples in the next video.